My family spent my $30,000 wedding fund on my sister's divorce, but when I refused to postpone my marriage, they called me selfish, defamed me to everyone, and never expected what I did on my wedding day. I'm 34 years old, I work in digital marketing, and Joshua, my now husband, is the same age, and he's a software engineer. I need to tell this story because basically my family completely imploded a few months ago, and I'm still processing everything that happened. The thing is, I got married 3 weeks ago. It was the happiest day of my life, but my parents weren't there, nor was my sister. And believe me when I tell you that wasn't an accident. I guess I should start at the beginning so you understand how we got to this point. My parents, Edward and Christine, are like 62 and 60 years old, respectively. They've been retired for about 5 years, and they have a small bookstore that's more of a hobby, really. You know, one of those used bookstores that smell like coffee and old paper. We always had a pretty good relationship, or so I thought. We weren't the perfect family, but we didn't have any major drama either. My sister Tiffany is 2 years older than me. She's 36, and she was always kind of the spoiled child of my parents, but it never bothered me that much. They were small things. Let's say if she needed something, my parents would run to help her, and with me they were more like, well, Courtney, you're more independent, you can handle it on your own. I met Joshua about 6 years ago at a work conference. Like we sat together at a super boring talk about content strategies, and we started sending each other messages, making fun of the presenter, and that's how it all started. We became a couple like 3 months later, and basically from the beginning I knew he was the person I wanted to spend my life with. He's one of those people who makes you feel calm, you know? Like I don't have to pretend anything with him. I can be completely myself, and he loves me like that. Last year, in March I think, Joshua proposed to me. We went to that place where we had our first real date, a small Italian restaurant that has a terrace overlooking the city, and after dinner he took me outside and got down on one knee and the whole thing. Obviously, I said yes. I was crying and laughing at the same time. It was perfect. The first thing we did was tell our families. Joshua's parents were super excited. His mom cried for like half an hour. It was really sweet. With my parents, the reaction was good too. My mom screamed and my dad hugged Joshua and told him, "Welcome to the family, son," all very emotional. A few days later, my parents invited us to dinner to celebrate, and that's when they told me they wanted to help us with the wedding. My dad said something like, "Look, Courtney, I know you two have good jobs and can pay for your wedding, but your mother and I want to contribute. You're our only daughter getting married, and we want it to be special." The truth is, it surprised me because my parents aren't millionaires or anything like that. They have their retirement savings and the bookstore gives them enough to live comfortably, but they're not swimming in money either. I told them it wasn't necessary, but my mom insisted. She said they had set aside like $30,000 specifically for this moment, that they'd been saving for years for their daughters' weddings. Joshua and I started planning the wedding, thinking we'd have that support. We didn't want anything extravagant, but we didn't want a tiny wedding either. We were thinking like 150 guests. A nice place, but not ostentatious. Decent food, you know, a normal and beautiful wedding. With the $30,000 from my parents and what we could contribute, we calculated we could do something really special without going into debt. We set the date for October. We had like a year and a half to plan everything. It seemed perfect. But then, and this is where everything starts to go to hell. A month after our engagement, in April, my sister Tiffany announced she was getting divorced. She had been married to her husband for like 8 years. I thought they were fine, but apparently things had been bad for years. I'm not going to lie. It surprised me because she never mentioned problems. But well, you never know what happens inside a marriage. What did seem weird to me was how fast everything happened. Like, she announced the divorce, and literally 2 weeks later, she had already left her job and moved in with my parents. When I say she left her job, I mean she completely quit. She worked in human resources at a medium-sized company. She made good money, but she said the stress of the divorce was too much and she needed a break. My parents obviously supported her. They gave her her old room and basically told her to take all the time she needed. At that moment, I thought, well, she's going through something difficult. It's normal for her to need family support. I didn't give it much importance. The months passed, and Joshua and I continued with the wedding plans. We hired a wedding planner, we booked the venue, a gorgeous garden on the outskirts of the city that has a super pretty old house. We chose the menu. Everything was going well. My parents seemed enthusiastic, My mom would come with me to try on dresses, and my dad would ask Joshua about the details every time we saw each other. Tiffany was still living with them, and from what I saw every time I went to visit them, she basically spent the day in pajamas, watching series and eating ice cream. I'm not judging the pain of divorce, really, but it started to be weird when 3, 4, 5 months passed and she still wasn't looking for work or doing anything productive. What I didn't know at that moment, and this I found out much later, is that Tiffany's divorce wasn't one of those friendly divorces where you sign papers and everyone goes on with their life. No. Her husband wanted to fight for everything. The house, the savings, even the dog. She hired a lawyer, and my parents, because obviously they couldn't leave their daughter unprotected, decided to help her pay the fees. The problem is that the lawyer they hired was expensive, like one of those divorce lawyers who charge like $500 an hour and who are super aggressive. I found out later that just the initial fees were like $20,000. Fast forward to July of last year. I was super busy with the final details of the wedding that was now only 3 months away. We had paid most of the deposits, the venue, the catering, the photographer, the band. Everything was confirmed and mostly paid for. One Saturday, my parents called me and asked me to come to their house because they needed to talk to me about something important. Joshua was working that day, so I went alone, thinking maybe they wanted to show me something for the wedding or, I don't know, anything except what actually happened. I got to their house and Tiffany was there too, sitting on the couch with a funeral face. My parents looked super uncomfortable and my mom wouldn't stop wringing her hands, which is something she does when she's nervous. I sat down and my dad started with that tone of voice parents use when they're going to tell you something they know you're not going to like. He said, "Courtney, honey, we need to talk about the wedding money." I thought, oh no, they're going to reduce the amount or something. But well, we can handle it. But no. What they told me was much worse. Turns out, and here comes the good part, they had spent all the money they had set aside for my wedding on Tiffany's divorce attorney. All of it. The $30,000. My dad tried to explain it as if it were the most logical thing in the world. He said that Tiffany was going through a very difficult situation and that she needed a good lawyer to protect her interests, that the husband was a manipulator and that without the right lawyer she could lose everything. My mom added that they understood this affected us, but that they hoped I would understand that my sister was in an emergency situation. I sat there processing what I had just said, and honestly, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked them, like trying to stay calm, "Okay, so what do you suggest we do about the wedding?" And my dad, with all the calm in the world, said, "Well, we thought maybe you could postpone the wedding until next year, give you guys time to save more, and us to recover some money." Tiffany wasn't even looking at me. She had her eyes glued to the floor as if none of this had anything to do with her. I exploded. I'm not going to lie. I completely lost my composure. I told them how was it possible that they had made that decision without even consulting me, that they had promised that money for my wedding, that I had made plans based on that money being available. My dad tried to interrupt me, saying that technically they never signed any contract and that it was their money to do with it what they wanted, which is technically true, but seriously? That was their argument? My mom started crying and saying I was being insensitive, that how could I think about my wedding when my sister was suffering so much, that a wedding was just one day, but Tiffany's divorce was something that would affect her for the rest of her life. And that's when Tiffany finally spoke. She said with that victim voice she has perfected, that she never asked for this to happen, that it wasn't her fault that her marriage had been destroyed, and that she thought I, as her sister, would be more understanding. I told them that of course I understood that divorce was difficult, but that didn't justify my parents breaking their promise to me. That we had signed contracts, paid deposits, invitations that were about to be sent out. Did they know what it meant to postpone a wedding 3 months before the date? We would lose all the deposits, we would have to start from scratch, and basically they were telling me that our wedding didn't matter as much as Tiffany's problems. My dad then said something that still makes my blood boil when I remember it. He said, I should be grateful to have a bright future ahead with a good man, while Tiffany had lost everything and was starting from zero. That my wedding could wait, but Tiffany's legal battle couldn't. That I had always been the strong daughter and they knew I could handle this disappointment, but that Tiffany was fragile and needed all their support at this moment. I got up from the couch and told them I couldn't believe what I was hearing, that basically they were asking me to sacrifice my wedding to pay for my sister's divorce, and if they thought that was okay, then clearly they didn't know me at all. Tiffany started screaming that I had always been selfish, and that this only confirmed that I had never cared about her, that here she was, losing her marriage, and all I cared about was my stupid wedding. I replied that she had been living free at our parents' house for months without working or doing anything productive, while I worked full-time and planned a wedding. So she shouldn't come at me saying I was the selfish one. The argument got horrible. Everyone yelling, my mom crying, my dad trying to calm everyone down but basically defending what they had done. In the end, I left the house, slamming the door, and drove straight home, crying the whole way. When I arrived, Joshua was there, and I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, processing the information, and then said what was basically what I needed to hear, that we were going to get married in October as we had planned, with or without my parents' money, that we would find a way to pay for everything ourselves. The next few days were crazy. I called the wedding planner and explained the situation. We ran numbers, reviewed contracts, basically did financial juggling to see how we could cover everything. Joshua and I tapped into our savings, got a small personal loan, and his parents, when they found out what happened, insisted on helping us with a part. It wasn't ideal to have to go into debt, but the alternative was to cancel everything and lose thousands of dollars in deposits, or postpone and start from scratch, which didn't make sense either. During those weeks, I didn't talk to my parents or Tiffany, and my mom tried to call me several times, but I didn't answer. I didn't know what to tell them. I was too angry. Finally, like 2 weeks later, my dad sent me a text message saying he understood. I was upset, but he hoped that with time, I could forgive them and understand that they had done what they thought was right. I didn't respond. We continued with the wedding plans. We sent out the invitations, and here comes another part of the story that's important. We didn't invite my parents or Tiffany. Joshua asked me if I was sure, and I told him yes, that I didn't want people who clearly didn't respect our marriage or support us to be at our special day. He completely supported me in the decision, although I know he was worried about how this would affect my relationship with my family in the long run. The invitations went out at the end of August, and at the beginning of September, my parents realized they hadn't received theirs. My mom called hysterically asking if it had been a postal error. I told her very calmly that no, it hadn't been a mistake, that we had decided not to invite them because after what happened, we didn't feel it was appropriate for them to be there. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then my mom started crying, saying how could I do that to them, that they were my parents, that regardless of what had happened, they loved me and wanted to be at my wedding. My dad took the phone and tried the more rational approach. He said he understood I was upset, but that not inviting them to the wedding was an extreme reaction, and that I would regret this decision for the rest of my life. That a wedding without your parents wasn't really a wedding. I told him that to me, a wedding without drama and without people who had just betrayed me sounded perfectly fine. I hung up. The following days, I received like 1,000 messages from my extended family. Uncles, cousins, my grandmother, all asking what was going on, saying they had heard there were problems and that I should reconsider. Some were kind and tried to mediate. Others basically told me I was being a brat and that I should respect my parents. I responded to some briefly explaining what had happened. Others I just didn't answer. A week after that call, my parents showed up at my apartment without warning. Joshua was there with me, luckily, because I don't know if I could have handled that conversation alone. They sat in our living room, and my mom started with a prepared speech about how they had reflected a lot and realized they had handled the situation badly. My dad said they regretted not having communicated their plans better, and that they understood they had left us in a difficult position. I thought, okay, finally, they're taking a step forward and taking responsibility. But then my dad continued saying that although they regretted how things had turned out, they didn't regret helping Tiffany because it was the right thing to do. And that they hoped I could someday understand that sometimes in life, you have to make sacrifices for family. My mom added that she felt I was being very materialistic by putting money above the relationship with them. Materialistic? I reminded them that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that they had made a promise. I had made plans based on that promise, and they broke it without even having the decency to tell me until 3 weeks before the time they were originally going to talk to me, when basically it was already too late to adjust anything. And on top of that, they asked me to postpone my wedding to accommodate my sister's drama. Joshua intervened and told them very politely that he understood it was a complicated situation for everyone, but that from his perspective, what they had done had been a huge disrespect to us. My dad got angry and said Joshua had no right to give his opinion on family matters, that he didn't understand our family dynamic. Joshua responded that he would soon be part of the family officially and that he absolutely had the right to defend his future wife when he felt she was being treated unfairly. The conversation got tense and basically ended with my parents saying that the invitation to the wedding was open if we changed our minds, but that they couldn't force us to invite them if we didn't want to. They left, and I was left there feeling emotionally exhausted. A couple more weeks passed and I thought things had calmed down. The wedding was less than a month away, and I was trying to focus on the final details and on enjoying this moment instead of being stressed about family drama. But then, like 10 days before the wedding, I received a message from Tiffany. It was long, like a complete essay, where she basically told me she had decided not to attend the wedding, even if I changed my mind, and invited the family. She said she couldn't stand to see my perfect happiness while she was going through the most difficult moment of her life. That it was insensitive of me to go ahead with an extravagant wedding while she was struggling to recover from her divorce. That I had always been the favorite daughter, that everything had always been easier for me, that I didn't understand what it was to truly suffer. She ended by saying she needed space from me and that she hoped someday I could reflect on my selfishness. I read that message like 3 times, trying to process the amount of projection and victimization it contained. I didn't respond. What could I say? It was clear that Tiffany was living in her own reality, where she was the only one who suffered, and everyone else was insensitive for daring to be happy, while she wasn't. I thought that would be the last drama before the wedding. I was wrong. 5 days before the event, I started receiving messages from distant relatives, people I didn't even know had been invited to the wedding, asking me about what they had heard. At first, I didn't understand what they were talking about until my cousin sent me a screenshot of an email my parents had sent to the entire extended family. The email was, and I'm not exaggerating, a complete letter where my parents explained their version of events. They said they had generously offered to pay for my wedding, but that when they had a family emergency and needed to use those funds, I had reacted with greed and selfishness. That I had refused to be flexible or understanding with my sister's situation. That Joshua had influenced me to cut contact with them because he came from a family with money and looked down on middle-class families like ours. That I had cruelly disinvited them from the wedding and broken their hearts. But the worst part, what really left me speechless, was the last paragraph where they basically called me a gold digger. They said I had always been more concerned with appearances and status than with genuine family values, and that this situation had revealed my true character. They asked the family to pray for me and hoped that someday I would mature and realize the damage I had caused. I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. It was one thing to have a private conflict with my parents, but to send a mass email to the entire family painting me as a horrible person? Joshua was furious. I had never seen him so angry. He wanted to respond. He wanted to send his own version of events. But I told him no, that the people who really knew us knew the truth and the rest could think whatever they wanted. The next few days before the wedding were weird. Some relatives called me to tell me they didn't believe what my parents had said and that they supported me. Others simply stopped responding to messages. Some canceled their attendance at the wedding. It was painful, but it was also clarifying. You know, knowing who really supports you when things get tough. The wedding day arrived, and despite all the drama, it was amazing. The venue looked beautiful. Everything went perfectly. My friends and Joshua's family were there supporting us. When I walked in with my father-in-law, who offered to walk me down the aisle when he found out what had happened with my dad, I felt sad for a second, thinking that my parents weren't there. But when I saw Joshua waiting for me at the front with that huge smile, everything else disappeared. We got married. We cried during the vows. We danced all night. It was perfect. There was no drama. There were no people crying in corners or making weird faces. Just genuine love and celebration. Joshua's parents gave a beautiful speech where they officially welcomed me to their family. My best friend gave a hilarious speech that made us laugh until we cried. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. Now, 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in my apartment writing this, while Joshua packs for our honeymoon that starts tomorrow. We're going to Greece for 2 weeks. My parents have tried to contact me a couple of times, but I haven't responded. Tiffany posted something on social media on my wedding day about difficult moments and people who disappoint you that was clearly about me, but honestly, it doesn't even affect me anymore. The truth is, I am sad about how it all ended. I would have wanted my parents to be at my wedding. I would have wanted my sister to be my maid of honor like we had planned when we were kids. But I also realized that I can't control other people's decisions. I can only control how I respond to them. My parents decided to prioritize Tiffany over their promise to me. They decided to spend that money without consulting me. They decided to suggest I postpone my wedding to accommodate my sister's drama. And when I set boundaries and said, no, this isn't okay, they decided to paint me as the villain. Joshua and I are happy. We have a beautiful life together. And yes, we have some debt from the wedding, but we'll pay it off together and it'll be a story we tell later. His parents are amazing and have completely embraced me. I have wonderful friends who were there for us, and I cut contact with toxic people who clearly didn't respect my boundaries or my happiness. Do I regret not inviting them? No. Does it hurt that things ended this way? Yes. Will I talk to them again someday? I don't know. Honestly. For now, I need space, and I need to focus on my marriage and my life. If someday my parents can give a real apology, without buts or justifications, without trying to make me feel guilty for having set boundaries, maybe we can rebuild something. But that's their decision. What I do know is that I married the love of my life. I had the wedding I wanted, and I'm starting this new chapter without the weight of toxic relationships that weren't serving me. And that, honestly, feels liberating.